Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Lisa Black, and I am one of the Rogue Women Writers. We're a group of 6 thriller writers whose backgrounds range from intelligence officer to journalism to psychotherapist to White House strategist. To let you know how this is going to go, for you participants in the Zoom room, you will be in the gallery during the reading. We encourage you to introduce yourselves by typing your name and any contact information you'd like to share in the chat bar. For those of you joining us on Facebook Live, please comment if you have anything you'd like to tell the authors, and especially if you have a question you'd like to ask. The comments will be monitored and relayed to the authors in real time. The authors will be reading only briefly, so we'll have plenty of time for questions and answers. All the books discussed here tonight should be available for your local bookstore. Let's all use the hashtags Rogue Reads and Rogue Women Writers as we post about our experiences with these authors and their works. As I said, my name is Lisa Black, and I'm the author of 15 novels featuring forensic specialists, which also happen to be my day job. I am based here in Florida, working with my local police department, and I'm thrilled to be emceeing this event. So without further ado, let me introduce you to these amazingly talented authors. First up, we have Alex Finlay. His debut, Every Last Fear, has hit a number of different most anticipated book lists from BuzzFeed to Goodreads. Every Last Fear starts out with a young college student's family wiped out in an apparent accident that may not be what it seems, while they were still laboring under the pall that his older brother's debated murder conviction had left. Alex himself was born in the South, but has lived across the globe, from a Pacific island to a British village to the remote Far East. Alex Finlay's favorite drink is Ciroc vodka, a man after my own heart, because it is gluten-free. He has a friend who sends him a case every once in a while so he doesn't fall on the wagon, paired with salt and vinegar potato chips. Alex, I am made of questions right now, so tell us about Every Last Fear.
Well, thank you for having me and for being with this esteemed group. It's really a pleasure. I'm a big fan of so many of the writers on the panel. So Every Last Fear, after a late night out of drinking and debauchery at NYU students. I should mention that I have an NYU student as a son, but my protagonist, Matt Pine, he returns to the dorm to news that his parents and 2 younger siblings have been found dead in what appears to be a freak accident while on vacation in Mexico. And the tragedy makes national news, not only because it's so awful, but because the Pine family is somewhat infamous because they were the subject of a viral true crime documentary. And 7 years prior, Matt's older brother, Danny, was sent to prison for killing his high school girlfriend. And this documentary, which kind of becomes a national sensation, suggests that his brother's innocent. So the book's really just about a carefree college kid trying to cope with grief about what happened to his family, but also learn the truth about whether it really was a freak accident or it has something to do with the documentary and his brother's case.
That sounds absolutely fabulous. So are you going to read some of it to us?
Yeah, I realized that you were going to have to do this. I just grabbed the book, but I'm normally not a reader because but I will give it a shot. It's the prologue. They found the bodies on a Tuesday, 2 days after the family had missed their flights home, 6 days after all texts and social media had gone dark. The last post was a selfie saying they'd arrived in Mexico. The dad and mom making exaggerated duck faces, the teenage girl pink-cheeked and mortified, the little boy wearing plastic sunglasses and a gap-toothed smile. The rental wasn't beachfront. It was off the beaten path, a small structure at the end of an unpaved alleyway carved into a patch of roadside jungle in Tulum. The smell hit the local cop in the face when the property manager opened the front door. The maid, hired to clean up after departing guests, was sitting on the cement stoop, her hands working a string of rosary beads, her face streaked with tears. The place was sweltering and filled with the buzz of flies. But for all the decay in the air, there was no blood, no obvious signs of foul play. That's when the cop knew he needed to get out of there. Within the hour, Men in white hazmat suits trudged through the property, eyes fixed on handheld air sensors. They found the mother lying on the couch, frozen, a paperback tented on her chest. In the bedroom, the girl was on top of the made bed, her cell phone still clutched in her hand. The little boy was tucked in tight, peacefully, stuffed bare at his side. The team inspected the stove and the water heater. Then they drifted morosely up the patio doors to check the exterior gas line. That's when they found the trail of blood and the father, at least what was left of him.
Oh, that is definitely a very intriguing beginning. So I have a few questions, and this may be an odd question, but why is the family in Mexico? Why not just a town in the US? Was there a reason for that?
I mean, really, the reason for it was I'd like to say I'm more original writer than I am, but I got the idea for the book when I was in Mexico with my family on a spring break trip, and we stayed off the beaten path. This is my way. I waited till the last minute to book the trip, and so this is a beautiful resort town called Tulum that I've heard about. And when I went to go book something, there was absolutely nothing available in the main areas. And so there was one spot that was really kind of out of the way, and it was an eco hotel. And so I thought, well, this will be an adventure. And I've never seen an eco hotel. And so we went there, and it was a lovely trip. By day, we'd do all the things tourists do, but at night we'd go back to this hotel, and because it was conserving energy, they'd shut the lights off. There was no TV, no kind of entertainment. And one night, we would watch kind of our laptops, true crime shows, and one night everyone had kind of drifted off after a long day, and I was scrolling my feed after we'd been watching murder shows, for the last hour, and there was a story about people dying mysteriously on their vacations in different parts of the world, and that's kind of where the idea came to be.
Well, I'm living in Florida. We have a lot of people on vacation like die down here. Sometimes not so mysteriously, but that does come up. So when you were like doing some research or getting into writing this book, did you watch a lot of true crime documentaries? Were your favorites?
Yeah, I'm a true crime documentary. My daughter and I, it's kind of a thing we do together. There's many. I think this is a kind of a renaissance of that genre. That the quality of the shows has just gotten so good. The storytelling, the Serial podcast I was kind of watched it very closely. I'm a lawyer, so I watch these shows with an eye towards there's good and bad with them. The good is they freed people who were wrongfully convicted. They shine a light on a lot of systemic injustice in our system and a lot of the problems with the justice system, such as in my book, it centers on Matt's older brother has confessed to killing his girlfriend. And I think most of us would think people don't confess. I would never, confess to a crime I didn't commit. But the reality is that it happens, and DNA has shown that particularly kids confess to a high, when they free people through DNA. When you look at the people who are convicted when they were children, some of the studies show that 40% of them had falsely confessed. And it just has to do with the way kids think. And when they're in this setting of interrogation, they just don't act the way that, and some of the things that investigators have been trained to be signs of lying, like fidgeting or, different things. So how kids act when they're under this intense circumstance. So that all that kind of came together in the story for me.
Mm-hmm. That is very, very true. It's hard to believe that people would confess to something they didn't do, but it happens every day, especially with children and teenagers. That's very common. What kind of attorney are you? I mean, what kind of law do you practice?
I'm mostly a writing attorney. I'm an appellate lawyer, and I handle cases a number of cases in the Supreme Court and appellate courts across the country. So it's a little bit like writing, that I'm in a room all day, at a keyboard, and it's not like on TV where I'm in front of a jury and doing all these glamorous things. It's really just a writing life.
Mm-hmm. There, and bet that's great background for being a writer. So many attorneys, I have noticed, so many thriller writers were attorneys. And my theory has always been that it's because you're not afraid of churning out 100,000 words, which would intimidate most people who don't do a lot of writing. And you're used to telling a story the way you want to see the judge and the jury to see it. And that's invaluable. Yeah,
I'm afraid still of 100,000 words, but the storytelling is I think the truth is true. And for me, it was a writing life, but it is quite different, a different type of writing.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, obviously, but it is. I find that writing a novel is harder than any Supreme Court case I've ever had. I'll say that.
Okay, well, thank you so much. That was fascinating. Now we're going to move on to CJ Box. Is the best-selling author of 27 novels, which is also how many languages they've been translated into, as he sold over 7 million copies. Most feature game warden Joe Pickett, making CJ a sort of one-man department for Wyoming, for the Wyoming PR department, to the point where the state tourism agency gave him an award. He is also executive producer for Big Sky, the TV show based on his work, which I've been watching. I'm on the 3rd episode right now. In his latest book, Dark Sky, Joe Pickett is stuck with a job that seems easy enough, acting as guide for a visiting CEO. But when they're pursued by a nemesis bent on revenge, Joe finds himself without communication, transportation, or weapon. Joe Pickett's favorite snack is beef or elk jerky, and Joe and CJ both prefer bourbon, specifically Buffalo Trace bourbon on the rocks with a splash of water. So, CJ, tell us about Dark Sky.
Sure, thank you, and thanks for having me. Dark Sky is the 21st Joe Pickett novel, which always amazes me to say that because I never thought there would be a second one. It just came out the 3rd of March, just a couple weeks ago. It debuted at number 3 on the New York Times list, which made us all real happy, and it continues to do real well. You gave a little bit of the basic premise of this one. Did you want me to read just a little bit from it or continue to talk about it?
Both. You can tell us about the setup of the book.
I'll read just a little bit.
What inspired you, but yeah, we definitely want you to read it.
I'm totally out of practice because for the first time in 21 years, I haven't been on the road doing a book tour, reading little excerpts every night. So I might stumble a bit, so forgive me, please. Book begins. Wyoming game warden Joe Pickett stood on the edge of the tarmac with his hands thrust into the pockets of his parka and his gray Stetson clamped on tight against the cold wind. It was a week until his birthday, and his leg hurt, and the brisk chill made him feel all of his 51 years on the planet. His first glimpse of the $65 million Gulfstream GS 650ER private jet was of a gleaming white speck high above the rounded snow-capped peaks of the Bighorn Mountains to the west. It was a cloudless mid-October day, but it had snowed an inch during the night, and the 10-mile-an-hour breeze cleared the concrete of the runway, rolling thin, smoky waves of flakes across the pavement. The timbered mountains had received 3 to 5 inches that would likely melt away in the high-altitude sun, but the treeless summits looked like the white crowns of so many bald eagles standing shoulder to shoulder against the clear blue sky. He was dressed as he always was for a day in the field, in his red uniform shirt with the Wyoming Game and Fish Department pronghorn antelope patch on the sleeve and his J. Pickett name badge over his breast pocket. Under his uniform shirt and Wranglers were lightweight wool long underwear and socks. He'd been instructed not to wear his holster and 40 Glock semi-auto weapon or his belt containing handcuffs and bear spray. The lack of weight under his parka made him feel airy and incomplete. He squinted against the reflection of the morning sun on the perfect white skin of the Gulf Stream as it taxied toward the terminal building. The twin tail-mounted jet engines emitted a high-pitched whine that hurt his ears. The pilot of the jet did a graceful turn so the passenger door lined up with the entrance of the terminal before he cut the power to the engines. The turbines wound down. A moment later, the door opened and a stairway unfolded to the surface of the tarmac. And there, not quite filling the opening, was a pale, gangly man with a boyish face and wispy ginger hair. He waved as if there were a crowd to greet him and not just Joe. This was Joe's first glimpse of the 32-year-old Stephen Price, the Silicon Valley billionaire and CEO of Aloft Inc. and the principal behind Confab, the social media site. Joe's job was to take him hunting. So that's how the book begins. Steve, too, is kind of modeled on some real tech mogul titan types, probably more specifically Mark Zuckerberg, who has kind of prided himself on trying to learn a new thing every year. One year he learned Mandarin Chinese. The one year that I read about that really intrigued me for this book was one year he decided to try to cure all of his own food. He'd never done such a thing. And I read a story about another tech mogul going to his house for lunch and Zuckerberg going out into his backyard and killing a goat so they could eat. So I thought that's interesting. So kind of from that, Steve Price arrives in Wyoming with his entourage of tech guys, gurus, and within just a few hours, they're on horseback going into the Bighorn Mountains, where everything goes horribly wrong. So the book is kind of not only about kind of a wilderness survival tale that's very basic and very kind of Wild West, but also about social media and how it can affect people on the ground where they live. There's also a side story about Nate Romanowski, the Outlaw Falconer, and somebody encroaching on his territory for the first time. So.
That sounds very fun. Fun and, thrilling, but mostly fun too. I happened to watch that fake documentary on the Yellowstone loophole about somebody killed somebody, but they couldn't try him because there wasn't a jury picked from that area. Anyway, and you've mentioned spotty cell phone coverage. What other problems or issues to enforcement or prosecution are unique to a remote area? Things that wouldn't even occur to someone who lives in a city or even a suburb.
Well, that fake documentary you saw was pretty much based on a book I wrote without any attribution or acknowledgement. Same plot. Right. This happens. But there are problems. Usually it's lack of access. A lot of the tools that law enforcement can use in more populated areas simply can't be used. It's hard to track somebody's cell phone when there's no service, for example. Things like that. Communications, definitely. And in this book, I wanted to really strip Joe Pickett down to the stud so that, like you mentioned, he's in a situation with none of those. He can't even communicate, no transportation, no weapons, and people after him. So it really transforms from a very high-tech kind of premise to the most basic kind of primitive survival story you can imagine.
And of course, I know we're all about books here, but I can't resist asking for the Hollywood scoop. So what does an executive producer do?
Well, in my case, as an executive producer, I produce the source material, the books, and then I cash the checks that they send me after every episode. And that's about it. I have not visited the set. It's being filmed in Vancouver. I don't want to go to Canada and quarantine for 14 days or whatever it is now. David E. Kelly, who's producing the series, has not been to the set for the same reasons. I was involved in the very first couple of scripts for the first couple of episodes and offered some notes. But at the same time, I realized there's such a vast difference between what we all do as writers in a kind of solitary pursuit and a whole army of people who all have their opinions on who should say what and how things should happen. And I don't want to get involved in the middle of that. I'm going to do that. There was a Joe Pickett television show just announced last week also, where I'm also an executive producer. And I think I may be a little more involved with that because they want me to be. But we'll see. You know, I think my job is just to write the books.
So is this new TV show on network, or is it going to be a weekly thing or a miniseries or what?
It's a 10 episode order. It's going to initially be on, it's called Spectrum Originals, which is on the Charter Spectrum cable system throughout. It's got 30 million subscribers in the US. But then, like every television show, it will be eventually probably on, you know, Netflix and Amazon and or, you know, different, every show you can watch many different ways, but it will initially be on the Spectrum Originals. And they just hired a Joe Pickett that I'm pleased with. So off we go.
Can you tell us who that is? And tell me it's not Tom Cruise.
It's not. He's much younger and taller. His name is Michael Dorman. He's a New Zealand actor. He was most recently in a show on Amazon Prime called Patriot that I absolutely loved, and loved one of the few times ever my wife and I looked at each other and said, that guy could be Joe Pickett. And turns out he's going to be. So we're happy.
Wow. Very cool. And I know you've had a number of different jobs before you became a writer full time. So can you tell us something about what each of those contributed to your writing background, or which was your favorite, or what inspired you to write your first book?
I think, I mean, I was a journalist coming out of high school and college, working for weekly newspapers, but I also had to supplement my income as a journalist. So I worked on, as a ranch hand for a while, as a fishing guide. I worked for a surveying company, wilderness surveying, and also I worked for the state of Wyoming in their tourism department, and then started my own company doing tourism promotions, and did that for 24 years until the books actually started doing well enough that I didn't have to go to my day job anymore. But all of those things contributed without a strategic plan in what I'd later do, because I was able to travel, I was able to get on the ground, to get my hands dirty, and things that I still draw on today.
I can see where all of those occupations would have come in handy, definitely, for your series of books. Well, that is really cool. I'm sure we're going to have a ton of questions for you later, but I will move on now to our next author. Allison Epstein lives in Chicago, and despite her MFA, feels that a pun is the highest form of humor. Her debut novel, A Tip for the Hangman, tells a different kind of spy story than we usually see here on The Rogues. Historical figure Kit Marlowe, considered the most significant of Shakespeare's predecessors, is recruited by Queen Elizabeth's reign to infiltrate the house of Mary, Queen of Scots. Allison's drink of choice is Jack Daniels and Diet Coke, along with pumpkin butterscotch cookies, which she assures us are not just for fall. And you can find the recipe on the Rogue Women Writers website if you are so inclined. So, Allison, what's the story behind the story on A Tip for the Hangman?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks so much for having me. This is really wonderful company to be in tonight. A Tip for the Hangman, as you said, it's a historical thriller set in the late 1600s, so right about the time that Shakespeare was big on the scene in England. And I studied Renaissance literature in college. I was a Shakespeare nerd all of the time. So when I started learning more about Marlowe and we learned in college, you learn a lot about his playwriting career, but what I was really interested in was the slight aside that shows up in a lot of Marlowe biographies, that he was very likely actually involved in Queen Elizabeth's Secret Service. And for me, that wasn't a detail that you could just drop into a conversation and let lie. So I kind of went off on my own research hole after that. And for me, it's just absolutely fascinating what kind of actual espionage activities were taking place 450 years ago. It doesn't tend to be the kind of thing that we think about when you say spy. You think, oh, James Bond, and you've got a gun hidden in the trunk of your car. But at this point, when you don't have technology to help you in your spycraft, you have to get really creative, and you have to kind of get by with your wits and the skin of your teeth, which is the kind of spy hero that I wrote Kit as. He doesn't have a lot of resources, he doesn't have a lot of experience, but what he does have is he's very quick-witted, and he's very quick on his feet, and that is kind of what you have to work with at that time.
Fascinating. So can you read some of the book for us?
Absolutely. So I'm reading from toward the beginning of the book. At this point, Kit is a student at Cambridge University, and he has just received a summons from a mysterious stranger. A strange, dark-eyed man leaned his elbows on the desk. Short hair inclining toward gray, beard fastidiously trimmed. Hands folded before him in a poor imitation of patience. His eyes, black rather than brown, turned down at the corners like a greyhound's. Kit knew the look in those eyes well enough. It was the look he saw in accountants and lawyers who frequented the same taverns as Cambridge's students, men who made their fortunes on slipped figures and miscalculations. Those eyes knew more about him than he had any cause to expect or any reason to doubt. Sir, Kit said, and bowed. Marlowe, the man said. His heavy brow and low forehead lent him an air of permanent disapproval. Yes, sir. Kit rose and glanced at the chair in front of the desk, but the man gave no indication he might sit. Do you know why you're here? The man asked. No, sir, Kit said. Yes, sir. No, sir. In 20 seconds, this stranger had done what 5 years of university studies could not. He'd taught Kit manners. The man pressed the tips of his fingers together and pointed the resultant triangle at his audience of one. My name is Sir Francis Walsingham, he said, Royal Secretary to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth. Oh. And here Kit was, fingers stained with ink and clothes smelling of tobacco. The headmaster might at least have given him a hint. What in God's name had his father done to merit the attention of the Queen's secretary? Kit couldn't imagine. His father was a rat, he'd be the first to admit it, but a lioness didn't concern herself with rats without good reason. His mind raced with possibilities, each more absurd than the last. Smuggling, blackmail, murder. Kit had just escalated to sedition when Walsingham spoke again, severing his thoughts. My time is in high demand, as you can imagine, he said. So you may take my presence as a sign of how seriously I regard this matter. The uncertainty was more than Kit could stand. If he needed to negotiate his father's escape from prison, or the tower by the sound of it, he wanted to know the worst. Sir, Kit said, I swear if my father has... Walsingham raised his eyebrows, and Kit fell silent. With that one gesture, he knew he was fathoms out of his depth. What the devil does your father have to do with it? My concern is with you.
Very intriguing. So in real life, Kit Marlowe was arrested for, among other things, counterfeiting and murder.
Yes.
Was he guilty?
I would say 100% yes, absolutely. And I will say he had a very interesting life full of all kinds of schemes. And I will say if the sign of a good spy is that you keep a low profile and no one really notices that you're up to something suspicious, Kit Marlowe was not a terribly good spy. He drew a lot of attention in his day.
Well, who did he murder?
There's the one murder that he was essentially convicted of, and I do go into it in my book, is not necessarily related to his spy work, ironically. He got into a tavern fight with another man in London, and it just escalated out of control. That's the sort of thing that would happen a lot in those days in Elizabethan England, and very often a fight would get out of hand. There wasn't a whole enormous police force at that time, so it's not terribly surprising. There's actually a surprising number of poets in Shakespeare's cohort who were also arrested for murder. They don't teach you that in high school English, but it's true.
That's still true today.
That is true.
People getting in a fight, is the cause of most murders. I've been working around homicides for 25 years now, and I can definitely tell you, number one cause is two people getting mad at each other, and followed relatively closely by activity surrounding the drug trade. I mean, the kind of guys who, plot for 6 months to kill their wife for the insurance money is really, really rare.
Right.
So have you spent a lot of time in London and Canterbury retracing Kit's steps?
I did for a while. I was really lucky to be able to spend a couple of weeks in London a few years ago. I would obviously love to go back now that I've spent so much more time with the book and with Kit. And someday, hopefully, we'll be able to travel again and go. But I did spend some time in the Globe Theatre, which is the recreation of where Shakespeare had staged his plays. I walked down the street in Canterbury where Kit would have grown up. And for me, that's one reason that I really love working in historical thrillers or historical fiction more generally is, there's so much real life to draw on. If you can stand in a street that your character actually stepped on himself, that's really exciting for me as a writer. And it's hard to replicate that sometimes in other genres.
That is very important. So Mary Queen of Scots, I don't know if it was because of Kit Marlowe or something, she wound up kind of losing that contest, didn't she? Even though it seemed to me that, like, succession wise, she actually had a slightly more valid claim to the throne than Queen Elizabeth, but her mistaken was thinking that would be enough.
Sure.
And of course, it's never enough.
No, the Mary Queen of Scots story I find incredibly interesting. And as a historical caveat, Kit Marlowe as a spy was probably not actually involved in the Mary Queen of Scots plot. That's where my poetic license came in. I just really thought it would be a really exciting character to have in that plot. But the reason that the Mary Queen of Scots debacle makes such a good spy thriller, in my opinion, is that you're right. She had a perfectly good claim on the throne that she was trying to ascend to. She just got outplayed. She was outplayed by Queen Elizabeth's spies. They infiltrated her household. They uncoded her coded letters. They had her watched constantly. And no matter how hard she schemed, no matter what she tried to do, they were just one step ahead of her at every turn. So, I mean, I have spent a lot of time reading about Mary Queen of Scots. I spent a lot of time thinking about her. I may be privately on her side, but she just got outplayed by Elizabeth's spy network.
Well, she was rather young too, wasn't she?
She was young when she got started. She started her scheming life quite young. She schemed in France and then she schemed in Scotland, her second two husbands. By the time she makes an appearance in my book, she's middle-aged to late middle-age, about the same age as Queen Elizabeth. She survived, I believe, into her late 40s, early 50s.
Okay. Which at the time was pretty up there.
If you made it that far, you had actually done quite well.
Yes. Yeah. And you said in an interview last year that you spent a lot of time thinking about salmon, the fish, salmon.
Yes.
Why is that?
That's one of those things that I cannot always explain. I spent a lot of time writing short fiction as well as a few other novels that I'm in the middle of now. And you mentioned earlier that I have my MFA from Northwestern, and in one course we took there, one of the exercises was kind of go through your body of written work and find the motifs that keep jumping out at you, find the items and the images that really like keep coming back in your work for some reason. And most of them I could understand, and a lot of them show up in A Tip for the Hangman, thing that I'm interested in, relationships with authority, relationships with the church, relationships with family, and all of that was kind of circling around. And then there were about 5 or 6 short stories that all featured salmon, the fish, just like popping up every couple of pages. And to be frank, I still haven't quite worked out what that means. But if any dream interpreters have any ideas, I will take suggestions.
That's very fun. And I was thinking about your book, and I was thinking about like a lot of, one of my books, Let Justice Descend, it dealt with lobbyists. And my first degree was actually in political science, which is something I have no aptitude for, which really, was a very bad idea. But I was thinking about lobbyists, and that they're kind of always the villains of the piece, and they're probably going to be the villain of my next book. But it has really always been like that. It's like, who has the ear of the king? that has never really, who has influence and who doesn't. And whatever that influence may bring. I mean, I bet when back in, prehistoric times, when you had 5 people living in a cave, every one of those 5 could tell you who in that cave had the most power and who had the least. It's just human nature.
No, you're absolutely right. And it's not even necessarily, I think now we think of lobbyists as, they're the ones with the money, the ones that can buy their way into the spirit. And that's always been true. But some of it's just how persuasively can you make an argument and how well can you get the person with authority to actually listen to your point of view. And you're very right that there's a lot of very Renaissance royal court aspect about that. It's who can tell the best story the most compellingly to the person who needs to hear it.
True. Human beings stay the same, no matter how much time passes.
That's the lesson of historical fiction. We don't learn and we don't change.
No. Well, that was very fun. And let's move on to our last author. Lisa Gardner needs no introduction, especially to me. I wrote an entire book, Stuff for the Children, because I was inspired by her discussion of psychotic children in Live to Tell. And it's not a coincidence that my character's last name is Gardner, although I added an I. Her books have been published in 30 countries, with 4 made into movies. She has received too many awards to list and lives in New Hampshire, where she goes hiking and snowshoeing with more than one canine companion. In her latest book, Before She Disappeared, a flawed missing persons detective searches for a Haitian teenager in a not great area of Boston, but finds everyone working against her. Lisa's favorite drink is Prosecco paired with chocolate. We have so much in common because that's my favorites too. And because of that, she says she has to spend a lot of time in the gym, damn it. So Lisa, we are dying not only for chocolate, but to hear more about Before She Disappeared.
Thank you so much. I mean, it's so much fun to be here. I just got to read Alex Finlay's novel a matter of months ago, and it's so good, and it's such a great company of authors. So Before She Disappeared it marks a departure for me. It is my first non-detective Dee Dee Warren, really amateur sleuth novel. The idea came from a phenomenon we're seeing in real life. We're starting to get more everyday average people taking up some missing persons cold cases, often on behalf of minority populations, sometimes just something in their community that has tugged at them. And, with the internet, with so many of the tools we have now, you can be an armchair detective more than ever. And interesting enough, some people are taking that up and having a lot of success doing that as well. So that inspired, Frankie Elkin, you're right, my deeply flawed recovering alcoholic character. This is what she does. She goes from town to town and she looks for the missing she feels the world has forgotten. No special training, no jurisdiction. Actually, I was thinking, Allison, of your character Kit. They get along well. They're just making it up as they go along.
Very cool. Do you have a section you're going to read to us now, or?
So Frankie is just a civilian. She has no special jurisdiction. And this opens when she arrives at basically the crime scene where 15-year-old Haitian girl, Angelique Badeau, went missing outside of her school. It's 11 months later, no sign of the girl. That is what's brought Frankie into the town. She is convinced there needs to be more work on this case. And this is when she does her first investigation and meets the lead investigator of the original case file, Detective Lotham. I spot on the curb Detective Lotham. You're going to tell me to leave, I say shortly, to mind my own business. Yep, it won't work. So I've heard. I have permission from the family. I also have the right to ask questions about the missing girl. Sounds like you have this all planned out. Not my first outing. So I've also heard. Did you call the references I gave Officer Shaughnessy? I decided to check you out for myself, then hear what others had to say. Good attitude for a detective. It's not my first outing either. So I asked the detective. He shrugs his massive shoulders. Sounds to me like you're about 5 minutes from cracking this case and finding a teenage girl the rest of us clearly have been too stupid to locate. Please continue. I learned all sorts from talking to the family, he said. He's not impressed. Go home. This is my home now. I rented a room above Stoney's. It's wrong to give the family false hope. How do you know it's false? Because you're out of your league. Because you only thought to check security feeds and interview family when this entire area is surveilled by way more than cameras. There's LPR, there's surveillance everywhere. We can see everywhere this girl went when she left this, every inch of the sidewalks, if she took a taxi, Uber, subway, train, we know it all. I know he's being sarcastic, but I take his assessment of his investigation seriously. In other words, all the cameras out here in Boston, and you have no sign of this girl. I frown, consider, frown again. Well, the sidewalk didn't just swallow her up, I say at last, frustrated. At this time, we have ruled out the sidewalk as a suspect, the detective intones. Wise ass. Then you're missing something, I announced firmly. Technology is great, but it's not foolproof. Maybe the world's cleverest city has now grown too dependent upon your toys. I think I am exactly who you need in this case. You have already put the best technology in place and it hasn't given you any answers. So whether you know it or not, now you need me.
I love that. You know, I was actually planning a book around a group of citizen detectives last year, and I only got a third into it, and my publisher nixed the whole series. So, but I was doing a deep dive into podcasts and unsolved mystery podcasts and documentaries and things like that, and they got me through a whole bunch of COVID projects, like painting all the doors in my house and spending a week cleaning out the garage. But anyway, I digress. It is fascinating now. And I think it's probably an after effect of the CSI effect, which really affected my field, because I got into it. I was between post Silence of the Lambs, but pre-CSI. And yes,
I like the timeline.
yes, that was when I started in forensics. So yes, things definitely have changed since CSI came out, which is great because there's so much more focus on forensics and funding, and everyone's trying to look forward. But the effect is you do have a lot of these citizen detectives and things, which is great and can make a huge difference in small cases that don't get that much publicity. But off the topic, in your Kill a Buddy, Maim a Friend contest, fans can submit friends and family names to be victims in your book. So what is the worst thing you've ever officially done or fictionally done to a contest winner?
Oh, this is actually a good story. So I swear the contest isn't fun. It's very popular. You can only enter once, but you can get as many family and friends as you want to nominate you at lisagardner.com. And some people do. Like we'll get dozens and dozens of entrants for one person, everyone trying to get them killed off. So there's some effort that goes behind this. So one of the women who once won wanted her husband. She had his permission for this. And yes, he was killed in a parking garage and dismembered, with an emphasis on the membered part. They thought it was wonderful and they were both very happy.
So it's all good. Yeah, I kind of had a similar experience. I did a character naming auctioned off at BoucherCon, and like the next morning I was waiting in line at the front desk or something at the hotel, and this woman who's now a friend of mine says, oh, hey, Lisa Black, I won the character naming in your contest. And I said, oh, well, the bad news is you're brutally murdered and dismembered. The good news is you're a hot 22-year-old. And she goes, okay, I'll take that. So you were awarded the Silver Bullet from International Thriller Writers for your work with the Humane Society and at-risk children. So what is your work with at-risk children?
So I'm involved in my local organization that does early intervention, daycare, and also preschool for at-risk children, for developmentally delayed children. They're the only provider of those services in our community. And I am an area, I'm up in the mountains, it's beautiful, but it's very much haves and haves nots. And so there's some areas of extreme neglect in marginalized communities, even in my own backyard. And to try to support these, partly because all of us here, we do a lot of reading about crime. Well, if you start reading about the sociology behind it, it's, those first 5 years of childhood development is so critical for emotional and mental development and every police officer, investigator I've ever talked to has been, if we invested more in social services, my job would be easier today. So I got involved with social services.
Well, that's wonderful, wonderful work. I mean, I had an attorney say to me after a deposition about, well, you probably don't have much sympathy for my clients. And I said, I have a lot more sympathy for your clients than you would think, because I see where they come from.
Yeah.
I see them as these toddlers running around these filthy homes with these parents who are in and out of jail. And in 20 years, the kid's going to be in the same situation. But at the moment, they're just beautiful, happy children, who just want to be loved.
Just real quick, too, because you also mentioned it, for my local Humane Society, the Conway Area Humane Society, which people can find online, I am actually auctioning off Thursday night, this Thursday. It's virtual. You can log in to attend, and you can get someone named in my book, and they might even live. Give some money up to the puppies and kitties here, but
fabulous. That's a great cause. And I was so happy to hear you say in a 2011 interview that writers should accept that we are neurotic creatures and we'll never have a moment when we know we've made it. So just get comfortable with being uncomfortable. So your advice is to not worry about those benchmarks in our head and just concentrate on craft.
I do believe that, actually. I mean, especially when you start out, you get so tied into the bestseller lists and awards and getting published. And does this author like me? And, does this editor give me a kind word? And you kind of almost like growing up need to go through that phase. But I think if you talk to the writers that have the true careers, the true longevity, they really are about the process. Because at the end of the day, we can't control the awards, the bestseller lists. Unfortunately, I feel often in our industry, once you hit, say, CJ number 3 on the New York Times list, well, now next time you have to hit that. So the externalities can become very frustrating at any stage of the career. If you think about the story and how much, I love to read. I love the fact that we all get to receive each other's books in the mail. That's one of the best parts of our job right there. So the process, what it means to be a writer, I think in the long term, that's where you're going to find more happiness and success.
Is there anyone in particular who was your inspiration for D.D. Warren?
The character's personality, no, but again, among these naming things, often too, when I am sitting in the middle of a book and I just want to write a scene, like a Boston detective walks into a parking garage, interesting enough to find our dismembered gentleman from earlier in the conversation. Just want a name so I can write this. And it's like, my neighbor's name is D.D. Warren. Okay, that works. And yeah, she's had 9 books now. And gotten married and had a child. And in real life, she's this beautiful blonde retired woman known for her baking and flowers.
She's very fun. She's a very fun character. Very interesting.
So Lisa, I have a question, and then there are a bunch of questions in the chat. So we need to maybe get to some of the questions. Also, Lisa, Bonnie Parker gives you a shout out on Facebook.
Oh.
She met you in 2010 and has just cherished that time. So I would like to know from everybody how much help you got from people as you came along when you were first starting out. Like, were there other authors that, gave you a lot of support, gave you a lot of, attagirls or attaboys and advice that was beneficial? Is there a piece of advice someone gave you that was really just the best you ever got?
I can share. Tess Gerritsen was absolutely amazing to me. In my career, I'd started out writing romantic suspense. So had Tess, Noah Roberts, Iris Johansson, Sandra Brown. when I sold my first big thriller novel, The Perfect Husband, I happened to meet Tess at a Boston conference because we're both from this area, and she sat me down. She'd just gone through Harvest and its, international success overnight. And she's like, these are the things you need to know, because they're always going to call you romance, your suspense, and only in publishing. So she's like, your publisher will never want to talk about your romance career again. It like never happened. She's like, only in publishing can you be a virgin again. Go with it.
Okay, a few questions from the chat. There was a question for CJ Box. How do you keep it so fresh after so many books?
Oh, thank you for the question. And thanks for asking that. I think part of it, I really like what Lisa said, and I think, it's to the point where writing the book and the process is the most fun and challenging for me. In my case, because the series now is 21 books long, I think it was never planned to be this way, but with each book I try to take on one or two big controversial topics or themes that may be in the news or may just be of importance to people in my state or my area, whether it's wind energy or environmental issues, things that are kind of contested. And then I talk to both people on both sides of that issue, and then introduce it into the book that I hope in a kind of a way that leaves the reader, I guess I try to introduce it without an agenda and let the reader come down where they may. But because there's so many things like that, different topics, and each book, yes, there's a murder in it, but rarely is the whole book about the plot or about who done it. It's more about the issue. And I think that helps keep it fresh for me, because the scenario changes with each book in the series. Plus all of the characters, they happen in real time. So all the characters grow a little bit older. Joe Pickett's daughter, who's 7 years old in the very first book, and much of the book is told from her point of view, is now out of college and on her own and working as an apprentice falconer for Joe's best friend. So because the families develop and the characters develop, that helps keep it fresh, at least in my mind.
Very interesting. And there was a question for Allison. That's kind of complicated. How much is Kit driven by the sheer ego and cockiness of a young man? And how much did you give him a self-destructive streak based on his relationship with his father?
That is a complicated question, so I'm really glad I saw it come in so I could think about it for a second.
Yeah.
I think for Kit as a character, it's not so much. I think his main issue is he's a character who does not do well with authority of any kind, whether that's he has a rather overbearing father in the book, and so he spends a lot of his younger years kind of trying to make his own way despite his father's expectations that are quite different than what he wants to do. But he also kind of chafes against any external system that says, you should be like this, you should believe this, you should act this way. In a time when religion was one of the big guiding principles of life, Kit was kind of an outspoken atheist. He doesn't like to be told what to do or what to think, and very often that tends to get him into trouble throughout the book. But I think it's also what makes him an interesting character to work with. I think I identify with that more than I might be comfortable admitting, but it kind of, I think that's probably what drives him.
Okay, interesting. Alex wanted to ask Lisa, though he loves Dee Dee, are you planning on doing more standalones?
So before she disappeared, because it launches a new character, Frankie Elkin was supposed to be a standalone and just this one-off book. But I apparently am failing standalone. So I'm now writing the next Frankie book. And I would never say never about the other characters, because I think we've kind of figured out by now, I also like to bring them all together. And there's no reason why we shouldn't just fold it all in. If Marvel can do it, why can't authors? So
I know.
but more Frankie in the short term.
Okay, cool. And he also wanted to ask Allison, what's the most difficult or most surprising part of being a debut author?
Yeah, I'd love to ask Alex the same question and get his opinion on that as well. But I think for me as a debut author, you do kind of rely on other authors who are farther down the road of their careers to kind of give you a clue in as to what's coming next. You can be a person who reads books your whole life and loves, going to the bookstore and browsing the shelves, but the process of getting your own book there it can be so opaque to someone who hasn't done it before. And it really kind of feels like you're stumbling forward in the dark, trying to figure out, what should I be doing right now? What's what responsibility do I have as an author to make sure that my book gets in front of people and they notice it and they read it? And I've been really lucky to have a really, really wonderful team at my publisher and my agent, and a number of other debut author friends online, so we can kind of come together and say, is this normal? Is this what's supposed to be happening? But I think the debut author experience really requires you to be kind of vulnerable in that way and just reach out to people who are more experienced and say, I don't know what I'm doing. Can you clue me in as to, what would be helpful here?
And the truth is, none of us know what we're doing. We're all just winging it. And Alex, there's a question. Is this the beginning of a series? Gail Lynn's wanted to know. What are you planning to do next?
Well, I don't know if a series is the right word, but there's a character in Every Last Beer who has been popular. I killed the whole family off in the book, so it's kind of hard to have a series with the family. But there's an FBI agent, Sarah Keller, who will be a kind of lead in the next one.
Oh, very cool. So, and what's your response to being a debut author? I think you wanted to talk about people who helped you, or?
Yeah, I was going to respond to Chris's question, which is there's a lot of the rogue authors who I owe a lot to. If I had to say I have a mentor in getting published and just advice, Gail Lynn's to me. Lisa Gardner, so generous, doesn't have, I'm always just, I'm a lawyer, so I'm always shocked when people are nice to other people, but the thriller community, I found is just, I don't know if it's because it's just the road to getting published is just such a up and down, rejection filled journey that when you get published, people are just much more willing to help other people, and so I've had Gail, Lisa Gardner, didn't really know me from anybody. He's been, I learned my book and spent time, she gets asked a lot to read people's books, and there's only so many hours in the day, and she's got to write her own books, and she's just been so great. And so I found that this kind of the most heartening part of this whole thing, because and as somebody who came to this later, I've had a pretty full career. I'd say getting the connections I've had. Some of my closest friends now are writers. Jenny Melchman has been, I've known her for a long time, and we've shared our kind of journeys. So it's just been an amazing kind of experience for somebody who, probably doesn't have a lot of friends anyway, and I'm entering this new community, and people are so welcoming. So it's been that part for me has been, almost as gratifying as going to the bookstore the first time and seeing my book on the shelf.
Well, that's wonderful. Well, unfortunately, our time is drawing to a close here. If any of our 4 authors have anything else you'd like to say, or any questions you'd like to ask of the group, by all means, shout it out. Feel free. If not, then I will just say thank you so much for joining us. This has been a great evening. And thank you to our viewers for joining us. Next month, tune in on April 19th for Kate Holohan, Paul Vittich, Robert Dugoni, and JT Ellison.
What a great group. That'll be fun.
Yes, I think that'll be a lot of fun. So we're
Thank
looking
you
forward
very
to
much,
it.
Lisa.
Thank you. Thank you so much. This has been a thrill to meet all of you, so to speak.
Thank you very much.
Okay, good night.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.